You're watching Rise News. Well, quite a governorship debate ahead of this weekend's election in Anambra State. And as we can wind things down, we are now being joined for a chat on all said by the Executive Director of Enough is Enough, YEMI, ADAMOLEKUN, the member of THISDAY editorial board, Sonny EKWOWUSI, and Franklin Ebuka, Head of News and Current Affairs at Ogene FM in Awka, Anambra State. I want to say welcome to you, gentlemen. And let me start it off from Sonny here in the studio. And it had everything we expected.
Very exciting debate and all that, very robust debate. And I believe very well that a future governor of Anambra State will emerge from one of these debaters that who debated today.
Out of one of the three?
Out of one of the three. Okay. Obviously, one of them will become the governor of Anambra State. And what impressed me most is that the passion of the three debaters in trying to ensure, saying that when they become governor, what they will do, and so on and so forth. And then the issue of security, because that is the most important thing now.
Right.
Anambra State is a no-go area. It's a very important state. And we need a governor who will tackle the insecurity in the state. Because if Anambra State dies, it's going to be terrible for this country. So we need a governor who will tackle the insecurity challenges in Anambra State, not just theoretically, but in deeds, in concrete deeds. We have seen among the debaters, I think I was impressed by the contribution of Soludo, Professor Soludo. He was talking about transformational leadership and saying that if he becomes a governor, he will ensure that he will mobilize the local security, that is the vigilante of Anambra State, which was put in place by ABGA. So he's saying that, look, if he becomes a governor, he will consolidate on what the vigilante is doing and ensure that security is tackled. Because you cannot tackle security if you don't know the terrain. If you know the terrain, you don't have your people, you don't know the traditional rulers, you don't know the local people. It's only when you are at home with them that you can tackle security. Because what is happening in Anambra State now is something that is very disturbing. IPOP has said that it is not behind the killings. Now, Soludo mentioned that the killings has to do with is politically motivated. And that is something that is very serious. It's politically motivated. It means that some people who want to impose candidates in Anambra State maybe they are the ones sponsoring the killing, so that voters will not turn out on Saturday to vote. And this is very disturbing. This is very disturbing. So we need a governor who will put an end to that. We don't just want a governor to hijack Anambra State. And you have seen from the debate that some of the debaters, you can see that they are saying that, look, Anambra State has vomited, we should not go back to his vomit or her vomit, okay? The past, what has happened in the past should not come back. People whom Professor Chinua Achebe called the renegades or the ruffians, they actually used very strong words. At the time that Anambra governor was kidnapped in 2007, and in fact, one of the debaters today went to his court of appeal to say that he was the governor in waiting, so he should be brought back to become the governor of Anambra State. That eventually did not happen. P2B emerged, and he did wonderfully well.
All right, so, Mr. Sonny, yes. sorry, just to interrupt you. Yes. We have a couple of more guests to join us. I just want to introduce Mr. YEMI ADAMOLEKUN, the member of Miss YEMI ADAMOLEKUN. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. We want to get your take on the debates that we've just watched, and anything you have to say about that.
Thank you. It was quite entertaining, I would say. Mr. Soludo really had it in for Mr. Andiuba in terms of just constantly engaging in that regard. But what I thought was really very interesting that speaks to the nature of our political parties in Nigeria is the fact that all three of them are technically PDP men. So both Andiuba, who worked with President Obasanjo in the PDP administration for 8 years, served as a senator, but now he's representing APC as a gubernatorial candidate. And I think he actually was governor as well, as you said, under PDP. Charles Soludo was a member of PDP, served under President Obasanjo as well as central bank governor. And then I like the fact that Mr. Valentine Ozigbo tried to then just sort of separate old PDP from new PDP. But it really just reinforces the fact that our political parties are just special purpose vehicles for elections. I think it's also significant within the context of the conversation you were having on security that all three of them had really contentious primaries. I think either two different factions, in some cases three factions. So I think if you look at the debate within that context, that really primarily all three of them are cut from the same cloth, if you want to say that. And the fact that when we go to the ballot box to vote, it's not individuals that we're voting for, it's parties. So I think that really is quite significant. But overall, I think the gentlemen lost an opportunity or didn't use the opportunity appropriately to sell themselves. They spent a lot of the debates sort of talking sideways to each other, contradicting each other or throwing jabs at one another, rather than saying, this is who I am and this is what I want to do for you, for Anambra citizens. There was a bit of that at the end as they tried to put their closing remarks together, but they could have done a lot more. Because at the end of
All right, I think
we're having technical
issues. Yes, let's actually see if we can get Franklin Ebuka on board, talking about the head of news and current affairs at Ogene FM in Awka, to give us his opinion about how things, okay, Sonny.
Yes.
I'm talking about Yemi just mentioned a very, very salient point that there were more of jab throwings as against selling themselves. Yes. Because we know we actually divided this particular debate into two segments, security and economy, then health and education.
Actually, she's right to a certain extent because, especially from the beginning, and they were both, for instance, Anambra was talking about his past, what he was in the past and all that. He didn't even go to the point. The point is saying, look, this is what I want to do. I think of the three debaters, I would say that Soludo actually tried to conceptualize what he will do when he becomes a governor. I mean, giving specific details, talking about how he's going to raise funds to be able to tackle some of the issues, because governance involves a lot of money. I mean, you need funding for that. And he says that he's going to get funding from abroad or so for that. And also, on education, he said that he will make sure that Anambra State continue to excel. You know very well that Anambra has been excelling in education, and that's possibly because of the ABGA. First of all, P2B was able to return schools to the missionaries, and since then, Anambra State has been setting the pace in education. And this, I will give it to ABGA. And Soludo is trying to say that he will consolidate on that. I'm very happy because human development is very, very key. It's important. Human development is the key to all development. In fact, it's the epicenter of all developments. And so we're talking about tiring roads and all that. If the human development is not there, then we are pretty waiting our time. So I think Soludo actually, he also talked about how he's going to accomplish the manifesto by trying to, he's talked about public and private partnership. That is also something that's also concrete in education. It's going to involve, in health. He says it's going to involve the private people in Anambra State, the doctors in Anambra State. And I know that there are professionals, medical professionals abroad from Anambra State who are doing wonderfully well. Some of them come from time to time to Anambra to give medical assistance. Professor Osorobe is now saying that he's going to fully involve them to come to Anambra State and set up hospitals and run them. This is very exciting because I'm talking about human development, that we talk about the health of the people. So I think he is the only man. And also, I also give it to Valentine Ozigbo. I mean, among the three debaters, he was the only one that was very, that comported himself, That is very important in debate, to have a cool head, in terms of trying to answer your opponent. He did that very, very well. So I can give it to that, I can give it to him, yes.
So should we throw it back to Yemi ADAMOLEKUN? Yemi, your thoughts on that? On this? on the discussion about the infrastructure and education and, especially about the millionaires that come from Anambra State.
Yes, exactly.
And how they will be used to galvanize and get the state to its best place.
Indeed, Anambra is known for that, and they do provide a resource for the state to tap into. I think it's something that the APGA government, as I understand, tried to do, maybe not as successful, but it's definitely a resource, and for education as well. I think one of the things that was also very striking when I think it was Mr. Soludo that talked about healthcare, and that 25% of healthcare facilities are actually, only 25% are actually in the hands of the government, public sector, that most of the others are in private sector. And that says a lot in terms of access. So that means literally that most of the population cannot access public healthcare because it's a small percentage of that. So the amount of resources that's needed to ramp into that is significant in terms of infrastructure. But I found it also interesting that insurance was an addendum for all the, I don't think the APC candidate mentioned it, or maybe it was an addendum, but it didn't feature very strongly in terms of, yes, if we want people to get access to healthcare, how do they pay for it? How does the public sector or how does the government make sure that it is affordable in that regard? And the same thing for education. I think the gentleman, Mr. Charles, just referred to it as well. Schools return to missionaries, schools in private sector, and that's really not an Anambra problem. That's generally a Nigerian problem, the quality of education. But the ideas for me, I think for Mr. Soludo and for Mr. Ojigbo sounded very grand and lofty. And sometimes you listen to these things and you then wonder, why haven't these things been done? Mr. Soludo had the challenge of having to say he's going to do something when there's been an APGA government in place over the last 8 years. So without necessarily criticizing his predecessor, but also saying the different things that he would do, laying out the plans. So it was a real delicate balance, I think, for him in terms of casting his vision without being critical. But as also Mr. Charles said, I think the APGA candidates and the PDP candidates were provided a bit more depth in terms of understanding of numbers, understanding of a plan, so to speak. And the APC candidate was really very shallow in a lot of his responses to the questions. You're laughing, but I read, for example, and I quoted him, for education, he says things need to be done right in education. What does that mean in real terms? What does that mean? And this is from someone, and particularly for him. You were at the federal level for 8 years. You were a sitting senator for 8 years. So quite frankly, I expected a lot more from someone who now wants to lead a state. And also in terms of just vibrancy and energy. APC candidate also scored very, very low on that, even though he and Mr. Soludo are about the same age, surprisingly. But of course, also Mr. Ojigbo sold himself that he was the youngest of the three of them. And obviously in his posture and in what he wore, he really aimed to communicate that I have fresh ideas, I'm a young person, and I understand what the youth of Anambra needs. And I think it was interesting to see that not only in words, but just looking at the candidates, the difference was really, really quite clear.
He said something like, not retired and not the retired candidates, not the tired and retired candidates.
Yes, he did.
That was a good one in his closing remarks.
Yes.
All right. Permit us, we'll still come back to you, Yemi, but let's cross over back to Awka, where we have Dr. Ruben Abati and Ngozi Alegbu. They are with Franklin Ebuka to help us actually foster this discussion deeper. Franklin Alegbu is the head of news and current affairs at Ogene FM in Awka, Anambra State. Over to you, Dr. Abati.
Well, we have with us here at Awka, at the Anambra governorship candidate debate 2021. And the name of our guest is Franklin Ebuka. He's a broadcast journalist. Well, Franklin, thank you very much for joining us on this occasion of the Anambra gubernatorial debate 2021.
Thank you for having me.
You watched the debate.
Yes, I did.
What impressions did you come away with? What's your assessment of the candidates?
Well, I would say that all the candidates, they spoke from the point of their understanding of what the challenges are. Now, if you ask me as somebody who lives in Anambra State, I would say that, yes, some of them, they were able to hit the point, but there is more than talking than doing it. At least we know what the revenue of the state is like, And going by that, it will involve a whole lot of creativity to get the money to be able to do all those things that they plan to do. Talk about what they talked about in the area of education, in the area of healthcare, the IGR generation projection, environmental issues, which is one of the cardinal things facing Anambra State. I know I once went to Onitsha to see one of the erosion sites at Kisi Arodi in Lanta, Onitsha. I know what I saw there. State governments sometime began trying to do palliative work there. Along the line, it was stopped. And for now, it will take billions of dollars to be able to control that. So I think they spoke from their point of understanding, but there are some major issues facing the state which I don't think they were able to address. The issue of urban renewal, like now in Anambra State, on a daily basis, we get to suffer traffic congestion that even whether it's during daytime, during in the evening, anytime you step on the road, whether it's by the expressway, it gets held up in the traffic for so long a time. I don't think they addressed that. I don't think they addressed the issue of touting in Anambra State. When you get to Onitsha, if you want to transact any business, it's always tedious. The issue of roads in Onitsha is another area that they didn't quite address on what they actually want to do there, in as much as one of them talked about Oboko. Yes, Oboko is one area that's like a slum, and he talked about that should be his very first point of call. Quite interesting, but there is more than what they said concerning Anambra State.
Okay, we will come to the specifics of the things they said, especially on the issue of education, in their response to what they will do to school enrollment. Were you satisfied with that intervention?
To some extent, I would say yes, I was satisfied, because they talked about affordability, talked about access, and then relevance. Because for you to be able to address that, you have to first of all understand what the challenges are. What is actually making people not to enroll into school? Now, who are the ones actually being affected mostly? Is it females? Is it males? So once you're able to aggregate this, then you'll be able to know how to tackle it head on. I know in Anambra State, if you go to riverine area like the Anambra area, it's not all about money that is the challenge, but the cultural practices, which they equally need to understand and know how to break that very bond, I would say. Because if you go into an area where they believe that education is not the key to everything, that once you are of certain age, you need to begin to fend for yourself. So you either go out to acquire skill or join your father in the farm, not knowing that when you integrate education into it, that helps you to project on a larger scale. So there is more to it than just saying that we are going to make school affordable. Somebody talked about offering free education. You might offer free education to some people, but when they are not disposed, when they are not convinced of what will be the end product, they might not accept it.
Well, Franklin, let me ask you, before you joined us, YEMI ADAMOLEKUN, Executive Director of Enough is Enough, who is collaborating with Arise Television to do this, posed us a question in our Lagos studio to do an assessment of the performance of the three candidates that took part in terms of content, in terms of energy level, and in terms of the kind of issues that they address. How will you rate them? What's your own assessment, considering what you saw, what you listened to?
Well, I think all of them, they did according to their capacities. I might not be able to say, okay, I'm going to give this very person 10% or 20%. But okay, I would say that in terms of being able to articulate his point, yes, the African candidate, yes, he was able to articulate his point. Likewise, the PDP candidate, APC candidate equally too, tried to articulate his point. But the thing is, people of Anambra State whom they were talking to, how did they receive that? Did they actually hit them at the point of their needs? That would be the better assessment of how they all performed.
All right, let's take it to Lagos, where YEMI ADAMOLEKUN is. Of course, she's the organizer of the Enough is Enough. She's a partner in this debate. YEMI, good to see you. Let's talk about the issue of security, their response to how they will tackle security. Was it satisfactory? And especially their take on how to engage IPOB and ESN and other non-state actors that are taking up arms against Anambra State?
Thank you. It's good to see you as well. I think Mr. Ozigbo and Mr. Soludo were quite clear in the fact that the issues need to be discussed, that they don't support, I mean, at least that's what I took away, that they don't support their tactics, but they won't condemn what they're advocating for. Whereas the APC candidates, in a sense, communicated that he didn't understand what they were agitating for. And he said he would have a conversation to understand what the problem is. And Mr. Soludo rightly responded to him that what they're agitating for is known to everybody. Their tactic is a different matter, but you can't say you don't know what they're agitating for. So I think the notion of, yes, in a democracy, everybody has a right to express themselves, and we need to discuss that instead of trying to shut it down and not give them voice. Now, in terms of now sort of the tactic and the detail, they talk about vigilantes, they talk about getting traditional rulers involved. There were references to politically motivated killings. So there's, in a sense, there was a lot of, we know different pieces of it. I'm not sure that anyone communicated to me clearly a sort of blueprint or an understanding. But then again, as we say in the Bring Back Our Girls campaign, there are certain things that unless you are in the state or in government, from a security perspective, that you would not have access to in terms of data. So one thing that I will say in summary that I took away was an understanding, which I agree with, that you can't shut up people who are expressing voice, that they want to secede in a sense. It's a democracy. However, you can be very clear that the tactics of violence, the tactics of murdering and killing people is completely unacceptable.
Well, Yemi, let me come to you now. Very quickly, one of the issues that came up in the course of our interaction with the three candidates was the issue of data. And at least one of the candidates, Professor Soludo, kept challenging some of the statistics that were put out there. Okay, we all know that data could be tricky or could be problematic in Nigeria, given the multiplicity of agencies. But we kept pointing out that we have fact checkers, a technical crew checking the facts. So, and you were interfacing with those fact checkers. What kind of feedback have we been able to get from our fact checkers on specific issues that came up in the course of that conversation?
Let's see. For the most part, none of them said anything that was glaringly erroneous. So you might be off if you said, for example, 48% instead of 47 or 46. So none of the data, at least from what I'm looking through the feed that we have, did anyone say anything that was like glaringly a lie? One of what I was curious about that we weren't able to sort out was the issue of a forged certificate. I thought that was interesting because every election you must have somebody forging something. So I was hoping we could find something on that, but we couldn't. But in terms of the data that was shared, underemployment, IGR, all of that from both Mr. Ozigbo and Mr. Soludo, again, in terms of depth that I mentioned earlier, they were the ones that shared data, hard numbers for the most part. Mostly Mr. Soludo, but Mr. Ozigbo also did that. The APC candidate did no such thing. And also, I mean, in looking at it, also sort of speaks to understanding of challenges. If you want to lead a state and you don't have the data on the finances of the state, enrollment and things of that nature, it does raise questions about your ability to govern.
All right, let me bring in Sonny EKWOWUSI, is a member of the editorial board of THISDAY. Sonny, one of the challenges of holding debates like this is to constantly hear the problems, the why, the what. But the real challenge is getting to hear the how, as to how those challenges will be addressed. Did you hear that in this debate?
I heard it from the presentation of Professor Soludo. I mean, he was specific, and for instance, he said that he was going to get a lot of funding from abroad or so to be able to tackle the problems of the state. And also, he also said that it was going to involve the private sector. Obviously, those private sector people, he specifically mentioned the Anambra medical doctors or medical personnel abroad. They're going to come with their medical things. They're going to come with funding to get involved in health challenges in Anambra State. So from the point of view of Professor Soludo, he did well there. And also, Valentine Ozibo also mentioned one or two things. I think, well, I'm satisfied. From both debaters, Professor Soludo and Valentine, I was impressed with their presentation on how they are going to, or the wherewithal to be used to tackle the challenges in Anambra State if they were voted as governors.
Well, Sonny EKWOWUSI, you are from Anambra State. You are also a student of politics.
Yes, exactly.
Now, in the course of the debate, do you think that there were issues that were not properly addressed that should have been addressed, perhaps in greater detail? Because here we have with us in Oka Franklin Ebuka, a broadcast journalist, who said a few moments earlier that the issue of urban renewal was something that he would have loved the candidates to explore, and also the specific issue of the roads in Onitsha, the commercial nerve center of Anambra State.
Yes, thank you, Ruben. I'm from Anambra State, but I'm speaking from a very impartial perspective, because not only me, but everyone in Nigeria wants the best for Anambra State. I think one of the issues that was just glossed by, that was not effectively tackled, of course, without mentioning them, is about the issue of insecurity. Many people in Anambra State are saying that, in fact, one of the three debaters today, I don't want to spill the beans, one of the three debaters today probably is behind the killings in Anambra State. And Professor Soludo said the killings are politically motivated. And so the Anambra people are pointing accusing fingers on one of the debaters today as the person who is behind some of the politically motivated killings in Anambra State, because, well, they probably want the politically motivated killings to be going on so that Anambra voters will not come out on Saturday and cast their votes. That issue was not dealt with. And I think that most of the listeners, especially listeners from Anambra State, we're expecting, that issue to be delved into in terms of saying, look, if any of the candidates is behind the killings, it is very unfair, because Anambra State should, the killings in Anambra State should end now, because if it continues, it's going to be a disaster for this country. So if any of the candidates is involved or sponsoring the killings, it is something that is very, very, very bad. Right. So, Ruben, I think that that was not actually tackled somehow.
All right, I want to say many thanks to you, Mr. Sonny EKWOWUSI, here in the studio. Mrs. ADAMOLEKUN here also, who was also part of this debate from the background. Also, Dr. Ruben Abati, I want to say many thanks to you. And not forgetting Ngozi Alegbu for a fantastic job you did in Oka there. I want to say thank you to all of you for being a good sport today, and more importantly, bringing democracy closer to the people.